Hello, my name is Nigel Furryfoot, and you are listening to Roleplay Geeks Podcast. Just now, you might be saying, now who is this Nigel Furryfoot? He may even sound a bit like an old halfling, as it were. Just who is this character? Well, you see, I am a character. I belong to one of the Roleplay Geeks players, or might I say the player belongs to me. This week's episode is all about creating memorable characters, and the gang is joined by special guest Chris McDowell, a long-time gamer who's known for creating interesting and memorable characters and NPCs. Now, I have one final task for you before we get to the show. I want you to try and guess which Roleplay Geek player I consort with. If you think you know, stick around to the end of the show and I'll tell you how you can win yourself something special. Now, on with the show and creating memorable characters.
Hi, and welcome to Roleplay Geeks. This is your host, Frank.
And this is Jim.
This is Steve.
And this is Steve O, a.k.a. the other Steve.
Today, we will not be joined by John. Apparently, he's having network issues. But we are joined by a special guest. This is Chris. Hi, Chris. How you doing?
Oh, not too bad. How's it going?
Not too bad. All right. So, today we're going to talk about something that I honestly know little about. So, it's a lot of questions, basic questions from me, which is character development. Now, there's two ways to think about character development, right? There's one is the mechanics, and that's just what the rules say when you level up in D&D or what happens whenever you get some more skills and whatever it may be. And we're not going to talk about that. That's it's in the book. Follow the rules, or don't. It's up to you. We're going to talk about developing a character, as in like developing its personality or its story or its history or his or her, as a character, as a fully realized person. And I say I don't know much about this because for the last 25 or so years, I don't think I've played a character more than 3 or 4 sessions. So there hasn't been a lot of room for character development. So this topic I think is going to be enlightening to me, at least, on how you do that. Now, we brought Chris along because Steven tells us, because of his lots of experience with Chris, that he's really good at developing a character and creating things that allow a character to develop. So I've given sort of an idea of what I think that we're talking about today. Is that basically what we agree on? Is that what we're talking about?
It sounds good.
Okay. All right. So,
yay, pre-production.
Yeah, we go.
We have a list.
You're editing this, right?
What? No. It's all in. There is no edit. It's just a single screen.
Yeah, it's a unbroken camera montage. It's just anyway. So let's talk a little bit about character development and what do you think leads to character development? How does one develop a character, I guess? I'm gonna throw that out to anyone to answer.
Desperation. I don't know. I don't know.
Well, Chris, we brought you on board.
Throw you into
we're
the
gonna
fire.
make you answer first.
You
We're gonna
definitely
make you
need
do
to
all
be
the
able to
talking.
play it more than like 3 or 4 times. But I don't know. It's a lot of it. I think is like when I like to develop a character, it just kind of let it happen, kind of organically. I mean, you can go in with a kind of a base outline of like your personality, strengths, flaws, that kind of thing, and just kind of paying attention to I guess your character's experiences in the gaming world, I suppose.
Do you?
Does that make any sense?
Yeah. Do you when you go into that initial presentation of the character, do you have in mind like some little tricks, like the character have a particular catchphrase or a tick or a tell if they're nervous or something like that? Do you have any of those kind of things?
Having some sort of glaring flaw is always nice.
What's a good example? Yeah.
Like a most recent character I played. You guys familiar with Kender?
Mm-hmm.
At all? I think it was in Dragonlance?
Yeah.
So basically, they're kind of like if you've ever read any of the books, Tasselhoff Barefoot, just talks constantly. they're genetically kleptomaniacal kind of things. So I created one that was the exact opposite. She was an oracle for Pathfinder, and one of her, I think there are curses, is she was deaf. So I just went ahead and made her mute. So it kind of it kind of forced you to role play a whole different way, because people would be like, calling stuff out, like, look out. I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't hear you. I would just sort of,
Nice.
smile and nod my head. And I kind of played it out that Kendra have no fear. They're completely immune to fear. So it was, it seems like suicidal to play a deaf mute character. But I made it so she had an animal companion that was kind of her overseer, which was just a big dog. So anytime I would go off and it would see like a dragon, well, I'm not afraid of anything. I'm overly positive. So I just walk up, arms out, like, hey, buddy, nice to meet you. I've never seen a dragon before. And the dog would drag me back, So like that sort of, as I played along, you kind of see how you're going to be able to do that, with the other people you're playing with, and what happens in the gaming world and stuff. It's a lot of fun to actually play that. It's one of my favorite characters.
How did you have the other characters communicate with her? Did they have was it like speaking Goblin or something like that? Some people had the ability to sign language, or was it everybody had to write stuff out to them?
Well, eventually what I got was it was called a transcendental bond, to where people that I designated my allies, I could touch them and be able to communicate telepathically for a short amount of time.
Ooh, cool.
So that was kind of neat. So I kind of, would describe what they were seeing in my head, which was like flowers and butterflies and unicorns.
Oh, that's cool.
Just to get the general idea of what, my emotional state, which was always unbearably positive all the time.
I sort of had that idea of, you ever see that episode? You ever watch Frasier?
I have.
Yeah, so there's this episode of Frasier where Niles gets into this fight with a guy he's think is having an affair with his wife, and he's like, gets into a sword fight or something with him. But the guy speaks Spanish, but he doesn't speak Spanish. He speaks like something else, like German. And the housekeeper speaks something else, like speaks both. Speaks a little bit of Spanish, a little bit of German. So there's this communication going on. So I immediately thought, I wonder if what he does is he communicates his thought to the dog, and then the dog barks and communicates with somebody else who speaks dog, and then they have to communicate that way.
What is
Why
it,
does
boy?
she always tell us somebody's in the well?
Yeah. What is it, boy? Little Timmy in the well.
Okay, so let's get back to more generalized character development rather than this specific one, which is a very interesting story. And I think...
So that's Dungeons and Dragons, I guess, that doesn't have a lot of, as you're rolling up
it's
the
close.
character.
He said Pathfinder, so close.
Oh, Pathfinder. I've never played Pathfinder, so I'm not very
similar.
familiar with it. So some of the games we like to play, for instance, Traveler, and we bring it up a lot, and it's one of our favorite game systems, certainly one of my favorite ones to run. It has a pretty unique system for rolling up characters in which nearly all, there are other character classes, but nearly all of them start in a military career or the Merchant's Guild or something where there's a prior career to where the character is now. So you get to choose your tours of duty and all this stuff. And as you're rolling your character, it says, okay, you did this, you gained these skills, and you stopped an insurrection and maybe got wounded or got a scar. Or, and in the original Traveler, you could actually die during character creation, which was very bizarre. They have since taken that out of the rules. But I always liked that. It was a little involved rolling up the character, but it helped you build and start thinking about those things. You're thinking, okay, I had to put down an insurrection, and then you and the game master can come together with, what that was, where it was, what was the situation, so on and so forth. And, Call of Cthulhu has some very neat tools. If you guys remember, I know I pre-designed some of your characters, but at the very end, you roll a d10 to see some of your tendencies or who your special person is in your life and things like that. And, like Frank, I think you rolled up a child. Jimmy had a fiance. That was out of the rules, but it helped us develop that backstory. So when we all started the game, everybody has a backstory. I thought that was neat way to start without just a dry character.
I think in Pathfinder you can elect to have traits, and some of them grant you can also choose flaws as well.
Mm-hmm.
And they're usually you get one or two of them, and they have kind of a minor game effect. Like every time you're allergic to horses or something like that. Something silly.
Mm.
But
why would you say that, knowing that I'm allergic to horses?
It's just this is a friendly conversation, Steve.
Yeah, it's
why
not
bring
about
that
you.
up?
It's like, wow.
Why bring?
Because it's part of your backstory.
You rolled it up before birth.
That's right.
Yeah, and why are you allergic to
Roll
horses?
better.
Because you got kicked in the face.
Right.
Yeah, that's what Mom says.
On the way to the fair.
On the
Oh, man.
no, we
You don't no.
Hey, Chris, what's the funniest goofy trait that one of your player characters or NPCs have had?
I played a goblin. He was a pirate, and along the way, it was something that had developed later. But
what, the goblin part or the pirate?
No. Well, both. But he was kind of like a not a customized, but a type of barbarian. It was a build that was special or especially tailored to goblins. It was called a feral gnasher, where you have this enormous mouth, and that's your primary weapon, and you grapple stuff with your mouth, and you can attack I think I could attack huge creatures with my mouth. And along the way, I ended up finding a small file, and it was a file for your teeth, but it was cursed. So every morning I'd get up and just start grinding away on my teeth, having all these horrible homicidal thoughts and stuff like that. And eventually I was off away from the ship, and the captain absconded with my file and threw it to the bottom of the ocean. And it was very upsetting for my character.
At least you can let go of it.
Watch that guy; he's a biter.
Well, I never knew who did it, so I was just paranoid about it all the time. Like, who took my file?
My character will come along and find it, no doubt. Hey, look at this cool file.
That's mine.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about, again, character development. Well, we talked a lot about backstory, and I don't think we've really addressed the question of to what degree does the mechanics-based backstory influence character development?
I mean, I think I think it can really help, and maybe even in particularly a newer character. I don't think any of us really have a challenge developing backstories, or we've been gaming so long. But if you had kind of a newer guy, or maybe somebody that's not as imaginative, maybe it can kind of throw some ideas out there. Like I said earlier, with Call of Cthulhu Traveler, have really nice tools. Not as familiar. I'm sure other game systems do as well. So, Chris, one thing I wanted to ask you in particular, sounds like you get a real kick out of designing or creating characters that are unusual. Do you typically set out to do that, or from the offset, or is it something that you kind of evolves, or a little bit of both, or?
It kind of depends. I mean, if you're making like a goblin pirate, if you're gonna, dip your toes in, you might as well just dive in head first, that kind of thing. But I mean, I've had other characters that, just I worry more about the character class and stuff like that, and then just kind of play from that role, look at what my alignment is or something, and then kind of just go with it from there and just build as you go along. I just have a general background, where I'm from, how I grew up. Sometimes we play with like pre-generated, modules in a campaign arc, and they'll have certain campaign traits that give you just a real light background as far as why are you invested in what's going on at the time that, you know, kind of kicks off that campaign. Like you happen to know a rich benefactor who is hiring you to, you know, et cetera, go kill the lich eventually and that type of thing. But, you know, I was like what you were saying about that kind of like picking out certain traits to kind of kick you off or to kind of kickstart your character. Those are nice to start out with because usually they're fairly broad. You know, it gives you a little wiggle room as far as, you know, what kind of spin you want to put on it yourself. And, you know, that's a really helpful tool. Even if you've been playing for years and years, you know, sometimes you're just like, you always end up making the same characters over and over and over and over.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this might it might force you to play, you know, put you out of your comfort zone a little bit. And, you know, maybe, you know, just have fun with it that way.
So was that goblin an NPC or was that a player character that you played as a player?
It was a player character.
So with NPCs, because you're a game master too, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So as a game master, how often do you apply like the player character, building of a player character into your NPCs to make really memorable NPCs that come back pretty often?
Well, I think it depends on how involved the NPC is going to be with the campaign. I could develop a full backstory for like, you know, the first goblin that they kill. You know, he was, you know, sad and, you know, an alcoholic or something like that. You know, who read constantly and, you know, was impeccably clean. But then he was going to die in 3 seconds. You know, it's not really worth the effort. But if you have someone, you know, who's going to give you vital information, you know, or maybe a recurring NPC, then it kind of, I think it behooves you more to, you know, give them a little more of a quirk, you know, whether it's, you know, funny voice or some sort of personality tick or, you know, maybe whistles a jaunty tune every time that you interact with them or something like that. So, you know, I don't go too in depth, but, you know, give them a nice kind of surface coat of personality, I guess would be a.
So are there ever any NPCs that you give like that really deep dive into their background? Or is it always pretty much middle of the ground?
It depends. What campaign that I ran a few years ago, I think it was Age of Worms, I think is what it was called. And I think it was the last D&D 3.5 campaign that they put out. And they had this wizard at the beginning, and you kind of interact with him fairly often for like about the first 10 levels. So he would have a pretty, you know, by the end of it, he'd gotten to know the PCs and, you know, they could interact with them more because I think when you interact with the PC a lot, the players have a lot of an expectation of how this guy is going to interact. And if you just take him completely off the rails, I think then your suspension of disbelief is kind of tarnished a little bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But it depends. It depends on, well, whether or not I feel like it or, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, because I think
or,
if
you know, how important is this character to the story? So I think if they're more fleshed out, have more of a personality and a kind of a general skill set, it really just adds more to the campaign ultimately for role playing and any other purpose like that.
Yeah, because I would imagine if you get a lot of NPCs that you're trying to have different traits and characters aspects to them, that it would get a little bizarre or difficult even.
Yeah, it could get a little confusing. You know, I've even done with that with characters that I've played. It's like I'm going in and I'm going to do this. I'm like, oh wait, damn, wrong character. You know,
right.
This guy's a fighter. He can't cast spells. What was I thinking? You know,
be
that
like
kind of
Robin
thing.
Williams with Tourette's or something. You'd have to change every few minutes.
You just make one NPC and they're completely schizophrenic. You know, it's just like, who are you today? I'm a barbarian. You know,
Challenge accepted.
I've been running into that lately because we're playing one Dungeons and Dragons campaign, and I'm a player in, and then we're doing another kind of homebrew fantasy game that Frank's running, and you know, one's a hobbit, whatever. I don't know. We
Nigel.
haven't really developed. It takes way too long to explain how this game's going, but anyway, every now and then I'll go back and I'll be like, yeah, I want to hit him with that. Oh, wait a minute, I don't have that. It's the other character in D&D that has that. Right. Never mind.
Sometimes you even talk in the voice of Nigel when you're
I
playing
did the
paladin.
voices wrong. Yeah, it's something I like to do. Yeah. It's one of my things. It's like, oh wait, it's the wrong character. I'm in the other world.
So you talked a little bit about players' perspective and NPCs. From a DM's perspective, how big of a role do you think the DM plays in player character development?
Well, I mean, every once in a while when I'm running a game, I like to present people with a distinct moral quandary. That have to force them to kind of think about just really how their character would react to it. Whether I think one campaign we were, it was all based around these giants were going to try to take over the world. So they were kind of scouting out an ice giant or a frost giant encampment, and they had a bunch of domesticated mammoths. So they ended up burning down this barn, and in the barn was a baby mammoth. So, kind of forced them to be like, oh my God, just to see, and they ended up saving it. But, they could have just as easily like, well, it's like cooking it. So, just kind of leave it to its own devices. And, then I'll hear its pathetic muffled screams from the burning building, that kind of thing.
We're having mammoth for dinner.
Right.
What's for dinner?
It's what's for dinner.
Yeah. His name is Chucky. And I comb his hair, and he's delicious. I made a sweater from him. Because then you can really test the waters too by throwing that stuff out there. Like, okay, they're all sick. They're just completely amoral and like, okay, so we're not going to bring children into this or anything like that. But,
Dip your toe in the water just to see what kind of monsters you have playing your game.
Right. Like, okay, Paladin. Oh, I think too, like as a DM, it depends on your interactions with the players a lot. If you kind of set the tone of your campaign as being like lighthearted, darkly serious, or anything like that, I think a lot of your players will respond accordingly, and then thereby proxy that their characters will respond accordingly to the kind of the mood or the tone of the campaign. You know what I mean? So it would if they're they're in a cute little mountain town, and everyone's wearing lederhosen and that kind of thing, and there's jaunty music all the time. Your characters they're not gonna be all dark and brooding, or they might. You're giving something to kind of you're giving something
destroy
to play
this town.
So they're in there.
It'd be funny at least, yeah.
They hate all the positive
that incessant
people.
music.
Stay away, or something like that. Let's burn this village to the ground. Yeah, kind of thing.
I know for myself as a game master, I've always enjoyed. One thing I like about role playing games is I actually like the act the parts out. I mean, I may as well admit it. I mean, you guys know I do a million voices, and that's the fun part for me being a game master, creating the story and then trying to breathe life into it. So I'm kind of well known with the guys that play with me that, I usually try to create an NPC that's around. Not always, but I've had a couple of memorable ones. But usually one reason I like to have an NPC, and it just depends on the campaign and the players and everything, is sometimes the players just aren't getting it, what to do.
Yeah.
And I mean, every now and then you got to have a guy that just be like, "Hey, man, try opening the door." Maybe there's something on the other side.
His name's MacGuffin.
Or if they're getting ready to do, or if they're getting ready to like kill everybody in the room. It's like you guys walk into a room and there's three, guys there. John in particular is not on here today, but he'll always be like, "Okay, let's shoot him." I'm like, "Hold on, man." Usually it'll be like my NPC saying, "Hold on, man, don't shoot them. No, they're not threatening us." So I always tend to end up, just my NPCs are often comic relief in a way. Even if it's a serious campaign, he'll always be late or missing or drunk somewhere in a corner, and they're trying to find him. Things like that. I don't know. And I have fun with it. It allows me to have a little fun too and develop a character in a way. I don't let him make big decisions or make the big kills. Or usually he can't shoot straight and things like that, but they have to keep him around because he owns the ship or something like that,
Right.
And the current Call of Cthulhu campaign, I've actually got 2 or 3 NPCs I've been playing around with to kind of see. I shouldn't be exposing this since you guys are the players, but I've been kind of seeing who you guys might take to, or, and you guys are so nervous in this campaign, though. It's like everybody I introduce you to, you automatically assume they're a cultist and they're out to kill you.
What's the game we're playing again? What was the game? Call of Cthulhu? Is that it?
So,
And what's the basic premise of that game?
It's
the world isn't how you see it?
Right.
I know. I'm shocked. I'm shocked that we would approach it that way.
And we end up in a cabin right out of The Evil Dead? Really?
Yeah, I have one guy that's a doctor and a surgeon that I thought would be a nice NPC, considering it's a deadly game, for one thing. And I thought it'd be nice to have somebody with some medical skill as an NPC. Wouldn't be necessarily a combatant and things like that. And they're all, I don't trust this guy. I don't trust this guy.
I'm the one guy going, let's bring him along.
Yeah.
Because he's always trying to kill me.
Everybody's just like, of course I've done some things that, make you not trust him in a way, but anyway, yeah, I digress.
How does that affect your creation of a game, right? So like I said, most of the campaigns we played, for whatever reasons, it's not worth delving into. We don't make ongoing campaigns, and therefore, as you said, starting off, if you only play this character 2 or 3 times, it's hard to make a development, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're sitting down to write a campaign, I often think in terms of a story, and not necessarily a series of stories, and that I think makes it a little more challenging to develop characters.
Why?
Elaborate.
Well, I mean, basically Steve-O's campaign, he keeps pointing out everything that's happened to us has happened, we've been playing for a month or whatever, but everything that's happened has happened in like 48 hours.
Week.
Yeah. I mean, so you don't change a lot as a character in that short period of time. And the same thing with Jimmy's running a Traveler campaign right now that, I don't know, is taking place over a few days or, very little time really. And then there's this big jump in time where we didn't play.
Mm-hmm.
Not we, the players didn't play, the characters, it was like 5 years fast forward or something like that. And there isn't in theory, you would alter yourself over 5 years, but in reality, because of the way the campaign is set up, my character hasn't changed radically, really, in that 5 years. So I think it makes it more challenging to think about a character evolving over time when you only play in a compressed game time.
Right. Well, I mean, then I think that also kind of gives you a little more wiggle room, especially if you have like a 5-year gap. You can go completely Avengers Endgame, and you can be like Dr. Hulk, in the next one or something like that. You can just sort of imagine, life-changing event or something like that, or even just something minor, just like, nothing happens or, nothing really extreme happens. And either, I think, are both, viable ways to develop your character. It's like, what have you been doing for the past 5 years? Well, I went and I bought a farm, and now I shear sheep. And,
and now that guy from 5 years ago came and burned it down and he killed my family.
And they're all dark and brooding, and that's completely valid. They don't have to be out there like, saving orphanages or, storming the castle, every day. That would probably get boring after a while, but.
And I think, go ahead. I'm sorry, Chris.
Oh, no. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I mean, just to answer the question, I think all of us game masters, and Jimmy, me, Frank, tend to think of, I got the idea many years ago. A guy ran a game, and he said, I like to make book-length adventures. And I typically write everything. I'm not going to say I don't use maps, and I don't use portions of modules that have kind of a neat thing that may fit, but I usually write and I have one kind of idea that's going to take a few sessions. And then, at the end of this, when we wrapped up the Call of Cthulhu, I was like, do you guys want to continue these characters? Because if you do, I'll make, a book 2 and we'll have a whole new thing. And everybody said yes. So that may be interesting. That's something I want to try to do. But now we've had in a campaign years ago, Traveler, but it may be years in between playing them. But, we would always drudge up some of these old characters. And
True.
So how hard do you think it is to maintain consistency of characters? Like Steve-O said that, he brought up the characters which are in that Traveler campaign. I believe the last time we played it was the 90s or something like that. So it's
that one's been a while.
A couple of decades. This is an extreme example, but even when I'm talking about John's campaign, which we recently played, it's been a bit of a challenge for me as a player to remain consistent in my characterization of my character over time. And I think part of the challenge here for characters is that today I want to play a guy that's like this. And then you play 6 months later, you go, I want to play a guy that's kind of like this, because part of the fun is you get to play somebody different, right?
Mm-hmm. That's why we're doing it, right?
Yeah. And I personally struggle a bit with, part of it is because, unlike Steve-O, I'm not very good at the voices and the different characters and the acting. It's not my wheelhouse when I DM. So it's a bit of a challenge for me to have a consistent characterization. And I think it's interesting that you noted that you sit down and you say, this class with this history and this alignment, how would this person react? And do you have that kind of in the back of your head whenever you're playing this character forever?
Yeah, usually. Well, as far as let's say writing campaigns, yeah, when you're running a game, and I think playing NPCs or trying to represent, their an archfiend or a nemesis or something like that, you got to kind of treat it like you're a player. When you're interacting, you know all the secrets because you're the DM. So that's not a big deal. But but when you're playing this character, you are using that in the same way you were talking about using an NPC to kind of help people along in the campaign. To say, hey, did you happen to notice that trap door over there or something like that? Whereas the NPCs that you're playing are more enemies or anything like that. Kind of, you can use their personalities to, I guess, also help the PCs along, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
But yeah. So, if this guy's acting like a jerk, well, you're going to treat him like a jerk. If he's kicking a dog or something like that, you're going to be like, oh, we should ask that guy to join our part now. That you're not going to do that. But
yeah.
But you kind of you can lead them to make those choices, which help them to develop their characters more. By having a little more of a fleshed out NPC, even if it's just some.
Yeah, I was going to say sometimes my NPC will be their conscience.
Mm-hmm.
Are you sure you will? It's like, man, you going to do that?
Yeah, you do that a lot with John.
Yeah.
It's like a priest, a pastor, a rabbi walks into a bar. John, I shoot him.
Yeah. Well, Steve,
it's not as bad as murder bots. I'll skin them and make paint out of their blood. Man,
that's
I
Mara.
wish I had
That's all
NPC
Mara.
in that one.
It wasn't all me. You were complicit.
You were twisting my robot arm.
You were an R2 unit.
So Stephen been kind of quiet in this episode.
Yes.
Well, I didn't need to say anything yet.
All right, well, say something.
Now you do.
Until I was blamed for evil, which is not true.
I think described as eval.
Okay, so let me ask a pointed question, because I would say among all of us, Stephen, you've expressed many instances of character development that you've had a more fully realized character, whereas the rest of us tend to speak the Roleplay Geeks crew tend to think speak in sort of shorthand. Oh, I was playing a pilot. Oh, I was playing a paladin. Whereas you talk about the depthness of your character. And obviously, this is something you've gravitated towards. So let's talk a little bit about your experiences and the choices you've made.
So when was the last time, Steve-O, that we played the Traveler campaign that I got to play in?
That's been a while. I think
That'd
about
been-
that sometimes because you really role played that character very well. I mean, it was the first time we'd ever played together, and the other guys already had characters, and I brought you in somehow. I think a doctor, maybe. I don't remember now. What is it with me and doctors?
He was a
But
doctor.
anyway. Yeah. So and I just remember you being hilarious. I mean, it was a great character that you developed like on the fly as we were playing one afternoon. So yeah, it was great.
I think about him a lot. I was thinking about him the whole time we're talking because and I don't know that Chris, I've told you about this, but his name is Chuck Biggums. And
I could probably dig his character sheet up. From
you probably
somewhere
could.
If you really need me to.
You probably could. And the short
Dr.
story
Biggums?
is
You couldn't find your dice, man.
Dice are different,
and
and they're not people.
They're not people. But sometimes I punish them like people.
Yeah.
So, good old Chuck, he was on a deep space scouting mission with a pilot, and they ended up entering meteor swarm, typical cliche thing. And one of the little bits broke through the canopy and blew the chest out of his pilot. And so he sealed up the cabin, and he's adrift. And after about 3 days, he decided he was hungry. So,
I was going to ask you jokingly if he ate the pilot, but I guess no.
So, right as he decided to eat the pilot, was exactly when the lights came on through the canopy and he was rescued while he had the pilot's rib in his mouth. And that's why his nickname is Ribs. So he is Chuck Ribs Biggums. And I have wanted to go back and play that character so much. But to be completely honest, I really believe that the reason I thought about that character that way for just making this little bitty weird backstory to try and color how I would play him based on how I thought other people would see him because of that backstory was mostly because of Chris. Because every damn time I played with Chris, I'm looking at my thing and I'm like, oh, I'm a druid, and Chris is this thing, and he's got all this character and stuff, and I'm gonna
It sounds delicious.
I'm gonna entangle it. It sounds delicious.
Well, that's one thing I'll give you credit for, Stephen. I mean, you immediately start creating your character. I mean, when the rest of us, we've started several campaigns. We're trying to, different games right now. And I mean, you're the first one to start saying, I was born on this, whatever. This is what happened. This was my sister. I mean, you've already got this backstory in like 5 minutes. I mean, it's amazing. Usually I think about mine a little bit, it kind of pulls together after a session or two, but you're ready to roll. With a complete, it seems to me anyway. You develop very quickly.
I have a lot of lost time to make up for because I spent so many years playing a character straight out of Dragonlance. So, my junior high and high school was one guy, and he was already made by somebody else. And I don't know, just after that, once I started into college, I started thinking about the characters a little differently. But Chris will say that my characters all have a similar flaw in the games that he's played with.
Right.
runs away
That's
from
okay. It's fine. That's fine. You may think they're cowards. I think that they
I was thinking cannibals, but go ahead.
They both begin with the letter C.
Sounds like a rock band, Coward Cannibal.
Yeah, but
Or Cannibal Coward.
Cannibal Cowards. Oh, where's Frank with that's a band name? He's not, he doesn't care now.
I get too much junk for that. I'm not doing that bit anymore.
Oh, too much. Okay.
Yeah, people get I think it, but I'm not saying it anymore.
Yeah.
I get too much.
Well, that's what I was saying. Yeah,
Yeah.
it'd be great band.
So
name.
it's like
Write that one down, Jimmy.
Will do.
I thought
I'm sorry,
I had.
Steve.
No, that's all right. I thought I had done such a good job on the Paladin that we talked about before we officially started recording that Chris hates so much.
I don't hate him. I just found it just unusual. It's like, well, and there he goes. He's run out.
But that's the whole thing.
That Velociraptor's fast.
It's awesome. He can get away. That's
the
thing.
lead in with that, the description of it. It's like Paladin, Velociraptor. You're like, oh man, this guy's going to come in with the claw and everything and the holy word, and then and there he goes. But I never a cloud of dust. This is amazing. It's in the same shape as him, and he just disappears.
I'm kind of curious. When that happened, was there any other characters unconscious or dying around him or anything? Just asking.
No, not in that one.
No,
I'm asking.
I can't remember.
No. Not in that one. But so keep that in mind just a second, all right? Because let me run this down real quick.
I'm going to die next time because
you're totally going to die.
I'm the only other healer.
Oh, I accidentally cast
coward,
harm.
huh?
I'm sorry. I meant heal, not harm. With a broomstick in your eye.
Yeah. There's worse places.
Right. Well, maybe. It depends on how much you like to see, Steve. Which
I'm still going to say there's worse places.
Okay.
Let's move on.
All right. So Tricky Woo. I was so proud of him. Because he's a halfling paladin. His goddess is the goddess of love and sex. He opened a brothel called the Virgin Sister. He spent this is like Greyhawk. He spent his time taking people from terrible situations, and the Virgin Sister was like this halfway house for like sex workers and things like that. And he tried to put them on the path to do other things. And so his whole thing was a different kind of paladining.
So he's with a fantasy social worker.
Right. Right. Exactly. And instead of tithing to the church, he tithed to the brothel and education programs.
Tithe, is that what they're calling it these days?
Right. That's exactly
Mara,
right.
you're the reason why I have to put explicit on all of our shows.
That's not explicit.
Oh, you'd be surprised.
Just imagine these poor sex workers who had to
so.
probably take a cut and pay to go off and be a carpenter or something. It doesn't pay as much, but I feel a lot better about myself now. Thanks, Paladin. Thanks, Tricky Woo.
It was their choice.
Is it fast?
Oh, it's their choice.
It was their choice. My God. But, and then I had to stop. It's not. I thought it was awesome. I love the idea of this character. Because he's not a jump into combat and I'm your faithful shield and all that, unless you are someone involved, with sex.
In sex work.
And then you're the human shield?
What? Yes. Oh. It's not like I was ever, I ever had the situation where it was like, you're going down the road and a caravan of sex workers is being attacked by 3 griffins. What do you do? Well, I charge right in. Nobody gave me that option.
So this is Chris's fault, is what you're saying.
Was it Keith? Was Keith the one running that one? Who was running that one? I
think so. Yeah, because I was playing... was I playing the stripper? Seriously.
I want to play in y'all's games, man.
I was a bard.
Yeah, that was it. You should have been more sympathetic to my career path.
Sex work. That's an art. That's how I express myself. And you were trying to take that away from me. I think that's where all the resentment was built up from.
Oh, wow. I really didn't see that one coming, man. Maybe from Steve.
Was that it, though? I mean, I can't remember.
It's good.
Oh my God!
All I heard
I know,
was you were the
was
stripper.
that-
Is that the campaign? I was the stripper. That you were the sexual social worker. I mean, I don't know, man.
Boom,
I got a whole
character
new
development.
perspective about role playing games now.
And we've only scratched the surface. So the one thing I did want to, before we close everything out, was try to give some advice to new players and new game masters. So I think the apex of creating memorable characters can be seen in things like The Expanse, which came out of a role-playing game, and now it's a television show and a series of books. And then even Steve-O has a character from our early days of Traveler called Stone, and he wrote a novella about that character. So if that's your goal, where you want to go, what advice would Steve-O, let's keep it down to Steve-O and Chris, what advice would you give new game masters and new players for starting to move in that direction in their initial games? Start with Chris.
You mean
or Steve?
if somebody had a specific goal to, I'm going to do a role playing game and then try and create a novel from it? Like that's a
No.
specific goal?
More specific. That I'm going to create a player, or I'm going to create a game with NPCs in it, and I want those NPCs to be more like the characters in The Expanse, where they're fully developed, fleshed out characters that are memorable. What advice would you give them to get started?
I think if you use like a lot of things I like to use are stuff from like literature, things like that. If you've ever read The Hobbit, you have a pretty good feel for how realized a world can feel. Let's say if you're like a DM, so you could base it on something that's like that, or you can use or something as a theme. Like I made one, it was called the Caveman Campaign. And I don't know if you've ever watched Walking with Dinosaurs or anything like that, but I based a lot of the monsters and everything off of a little paleontology website that I found. So I went through and kind of made all the stats for things like giant ground sloths and mammoths and things like that, and kind of built a world up from there. So I think it's good to start out small, and then just kind of like use that as a seed to kind of grow it out. And you can do the same with a character too. You can start with a certain amount of like traits or flaws or just a general personality, and then sort of work that out as you go along, as you sort of begin to build that character, and use that as a cue for other things within your campaign or experiences with your character that you can kind of change on the fly, but not detract from that core concept or character that you've created.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like he's going to have a base. And I think NPCs and characters, they can change just like people.
Oh, yeah.
People in real life. For me, I did my whole Traveler universe and world did develop into kind of a writing space for me, and some of the characters in my stories are player characters, but one specific one is an NPC that I had that the guys always liked really well, but he's quite different in the novella than he was in the campaign. But I think what I try to do, and what I'm trying to do right now, is create. Because it seems to be popular in good literature right now, is to try and create somebody that's a little ambiguous. Sometimes he does good stuff, sometimes he does bad stuff. Is this a good guy? Is this guy supposed to be my enemy, or is he an ally? And that's something in the Call of Cthulhu campaign I specifically set out to do. Of course, again, showing my hand. And I don't really know where it's going to go, honestly, because a lot of it depends on your all's reactions of how some of these people are going to play out. I don't know, but I love it. like my old Traveler campaign, a lot of the stories, the characters, the development came from you guys. You know, you guys played these characters and stuff and developed their traits. And, you know, I just play off that. That's how my NPCs develop, is how you relate to them. So a tip for somebody new, read some stories, you know, read good literature for one thing. Don't go for the cardboard cutout bad guys and cardboard cutout good guys for that matter. You know, try to make sure your NPCs and your player characters have a motivation other than I want to go in a dungeon and kill a bunch of stuff and get rich or something. I mean, I think there has to be some personal motivation for players and NPCs alike. I think the more you read good literature, fantasy or science fiction, or any kind of decent novels will help you develop that.
I like what you said about making things ambiguous, because if you give it, you make things a little more on the general side, you're really putting it into the player's imaginations. It's like, you know, when you were talking about, you know, somewhat of an ambiguous character, like I always think about the Elric saga, if you've ever read that. Elric of Melna Bonet. I think it was a role-playing game for a short time. You know,
I'm familiar with it, but I haven't read it.
It's really good because it's I love his writing style because it's very general, but he chooses his words very carefully. So it really sparks your own imagination. I'm sure the picture in my head of what that character looks like is completely different than somebody else's. And I think that works well with the players in your game because you know, you give a broad enough description, they're going to fill in the blanks. So it's a good give and take, you know, especially if you're starting out running a game, is to really pay attention to what your characters want to do, what your players want to do, because that helps inform the decisions that you make because you want everybody to have fun. You know, and by also paying attention to your players too, you really know how to mess with their heads. You know, so you can put in those moral quandaries, you can put in those what if situations that really get them invested in their characters and get you a lot more invested in your game as well. You know, so I think it's important to really just be able to pay attention, not just be like, my world is going to be like this and try to pigeon or shoehorn everybody into it, but to have it to be a mutual kind of growth and development.
Oh, that's perfectly said. Yeah, for sure. Because I've made that mistake more than once to try and totally control the adventure, and it just frustrates characters. And you know, you just it has to be a give and take. For sure. You have to play off each other. The NPCs need to develop as well as the characters based on each other's reactions. So
yeah. It needs to be more of a social event rather than just a game. You know, I kind of look at it that way. It's a role playing game. So let's pretend. That kind of thing.
Okay, so now let's move on to a segment that we call 12 Questions with our guest. Take it away, Steve-O.
So, Chris, what was your first pencil and paper RPG you ever played, or tabletop, as they call it now? And what kind of character did you play?
It was Dungeons and Dragons, first edition. I think it was around 1980 or something like that. I made a character based on actually a catalog for policemen, I guess, law enforcement things. It was called Brigade Quartermaster. So I made a character called the Brigade Quartermaster, and he had a long bow and, you know, a cloak and that kind of a thing. So that was the first system and character that I made. Yeah, kind of a huntsman, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah, like a Robin Hood. Only, well, a guy chasing down Robin Hood, I guess.
All right, sort of.
Next question. Do you prefer to game master or to be a player?
To be a player. It's a lot less work.
That's true. All right, next question. What is your most favorite gaming moment?
A friend of mine was running this continuous Ravenloft campaign. And I had a character that I'd been playing for about a year, maybe 2 years, who had just developed from an innocent nun into this absolute monster. There was this whole thing about a sect of a religion which was prophesized that I would create. So we went to this huge meeting to kind of verify my religion, my sect of my religion that I was leading, as valid. And in order to prove that, each one of my followers who I had brought from this circus, I turned them all into werewolves. So that what they had to do is they all had to transform. And if they all did, well, it would be verified that I would be this aspect of Ezra, which was the goddess or whatever. And it was all these characters that I had, been my followers for years, and they were devoted to me. And there was this one tiny little gnome girl named Eliwick, and she was the last one to transform, and that little gnome didn't transform. So I was, completely appalled. All the other leaders of the different religious sects, which were all based on alignment, they all attacked me and my followers, and then I faded off into darkness and became a Dark Lord of Ravenloft after that. I'd failed my last powers check, so yeah, I was an unholy creature. But yeah, that was the moment where, and in Ravenloft, when that happens, when you become a Dark Lord, you hand over your character sheet. You are now a part of Ravenloft. So she has her own little realm. I have to design her castle still, like in that, but no, that was very memorable. I almost like cried, wept tears of joy.
You're about to break up now.
I'm sorry.
You're getting a little misty up there, Chris.
Excuse me for a second. I'm going to mute myself.
Okay, next question. Conversely, what is your least favorite gaming moment?
That is a good question.
Do not make it be about me.
Not everything's about you, Steve. Right? Not everything's about
not you. I know. I know.
Oh, no.
Like,
well,
oh, yeah, there was that time.
Oh, wait. Yeah, sorry, Steve. This is a little bit about you. It was. I'm sorry. Well, what I was talking about before, that Age of Worms campaign that I was running, we were in that for what, like 2.5 years? And Steve had developed this character from a third-party source. It was a binder. Yes. And so it's going to build up to the emergence of Caius, the worm god or whatever. And there's this huge obelisk, and we've gone from 1st to 20th level. And, been looking forward to this for a solid year, planning it out. And the whole combat lasted 3 rounds. This big wormy foot comes stepping out of this thing, and the next thing I know, by the time he fully emerges, they'd killed a god. Largely in part to someone's actions. We're not going to point fingers or anything like that. But I did get my revenge. I did kind of like the epilogue, or the epilogue of the whole story, and I made sure that his character died in childbirth. So that was my revenge.
Oh man, that's awesome. All right,
she was a very small person and had narrow hips.
Yeah.
Okay, next question. What?
I'm sorry, Steve. We're out of time. No more time for questions. It's gone a bit long. So I want to thank Chris for joining us on this particular podcast.
Oh, thank you guys.
And it's been, I think, a very enlightening and somewhat confusing but yet amusing episode. I hope you've enjoyed it. So if you have any thoughts or opinions about character development or any ideas for things that you'd like us to cover, you can reach us at the contact information coming later in the podcast.
Thanks, Chris.
Oh, no problem. Thank you, guys. This is fun.
Well now, did you figure out which player's character I am? If you think you know, email roleplaygeeks@roleplaygeeks.com with your answer. Just say, I think Nigel Furryfoot is blank. Maybe it's Frank, or it's John, or it's Jim, or it's Stephen, or Steve-O, aka the other Steve, or maybe it was Chris McDowell. We'll take all the correct answers and have a drawing in a couple of weeks for a special prize. So be sure to include your name and your email address when you send it in. Roleplay Geeks is out there on most forms of social media, or whatever that is. And please, rate and review wherever you listen to your podcast. It helps other people find the show. Thanks, that's all for this week, and thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Role Play Geeks Podcast.